We've all done it. We're watching a movie or reading a news headline about a person trapped in a toxic relationship, and we mutter those 5 words. Why doesn't she just leave? It sounds so simple from the outside. If the house is on fire, you walk out the front door. But what if the fire started as a cozy hearth? What if the person who smells like smoke is also the only person who ever made you feel truly seen? Most of us think of villains as people who wear their malice on their sleeves. We imagine we'd spot a predator from a mile away. But the reality is that domestic horror doesn't usually start with a punch. It starts with a brilliant neurosurgeon, a chance meeting on a rooftop, and a vulnerable conversation about the naked truth. Colleen Hoover's book, It Ends With Us, became a cultural phenomenon, not just because of its popularity on social media, but because it forces us to confront the anatomy of empathy. It asks us to consider the weight of generational trauma and why the most important romance of your life might be the one you have to walk away from. We often treat relationships like fixer-upper houses, thinking if we just polish the floors enough, the foundation won't matter. But as we explore the themes of this story, we see that you can't live in a house with a cracked foundation, no matter how beautiful the view is from the roof. The first major idea we have to unpack is the halo effect. This is a cognitive bias where we let one incredible trait, like a person's brilliance, their success, or their physical beauty, blind us to everything else. In this story, we meet Ryle Kincaid. He is the personification of the perfect man on paper. He's a neurosurgeon, he's assertive, and he's seemingly all in. In almost any other book, this would be the happy ending. But this is where the trap is set. The lesson here is that Lily doesn't fall for a bad guy. She falls for a man who is 95% incredible. In the real world, we often wait for that final 5% of bad behavior to go away because the rest is so dazzling. We justify the red flags by pointing to the gold stars. We tell ourselves that someone so talented or so loving couldn't possibly be dangerous. This is the architect of adoration, where the pedestal we build for someone becomes the very thing that prevents us from seeing them clearly. This leads directly into the second big idea, the erosion of the just once rule. There is a specific psychological shift that happens when the first instance of aggression occurs. It is rarely framed as a deliberate act of malice. Instead, it's framed as an accident, a fluke, or a moment of extreme stress. Because most people have high empathy, their first instinct is to understand and forgive. If you think of your boundaries like a line drawn in the sand, you would notice if someone jumped over it. But if they move that line by just 1 inch while you're sleeping, and then another inch the next day, you don't realize you've retreated a mile until your back is against the ocean. The story forces us to sit in that discomfort. It makes the reader actually like the antagonist, which is exactly why leaving is such a Herculean task. You aren't just leaving a person. You are grieving the version of them you thought was real. You are fighting against your own capacity for mercy. But then we have the third major framework, which is the idea of the past acting as a compass. This is where the character of Atlas comes in. If the present relationship represents a polished, expensive reality, the past represents a raw and survival-based truth. Atlas was the boy who had nothing, the one who lived in an abandoned house and relied on the kindness of a teenage girl. Their connection wasn't built on status or grand gestures, it was built on shared protection. Atlas serves as a narrative anchor. He represents who the protagonist was before she became a successful business owner. The lesson here is that our history is often the only thing that can tell us when our present has gone off course. Atlas reminds her of what love is supposed to look like when it's stripped of ego and violence. Love isn't about possession or a passion that leaves bruises. It's about being a safe harbor. By contrasting these two men, The story proves that trauma isn't an excuse for cruelty. If someone can come from a background of total loss and still choose kindness, it strips away the excuses of those who have everything and still choose violence. The fourth and perhaps most transformative idea is the concept of the sunk cost of the heart. By the final act, the protagonist finds herself in the exact position her mother was in years before. This is where we realize that the cycle of abuse is a circle, and circles don't have exit ramps unless you build one yourself. There's a massive pressure to fight for your family and to stay for the sake of history. However, the true meaning of the title is revealed not as a romantic promise between lovers, but as a promise from a parent to a child. It is the realization that ending a cycle doesn't mean you stop loving the person. It means you prioritize the legacy of the future over the comfort of the present. It shifts the focus from being a victim to being a gatekeeper of a new generation's peace. It's a radical act of self-preservation that redefines what strength looks like. Now, we have to look at this book through a critical lens. There is a significant controversy regarding how this story is marketed. If you look at the covers, they are often bright, floral, and pink. On social media, it is frequently categorized as a contemporary romance. Some critics argue that this is dangerous because it uses the tropes of a romance novel, the hot doctor, the love triangle, the steamy encounters, to package a story about domestic abuse. They worry it romanticizes a situation that is actually a tragedy. However, there is another way to look at it. By smuggling a story about survival inside the packaging of a popular romance, the author reaches an audience that might never pick up a clinical book on the subject. It meets people where they are. While the writing can sometimes be simplistic or the dialogue a bit melodramatic, that might actually be why it resonates so deeply. Real life is messy, and real people often use grand metaphors to describe their pain. It isn't trying to be a piece of high literary fiction. It's trying to be a mirror. And sometimes, a mirror needs to be simple to be effective. Is this book a masterpiece? That's up for debate. But its impact on how we discuss the line in the sand is undeniable. It challenges the victim-blaming narrative by showing exactly how the trap is built, piece by piece, with flowers and neurosurgery and promises. It's not a feel-good story for a light afternoon. It is heavy, it is triggering, and it is designed to make you feel the weight of a choice that no one should have to make. It's worth reading not for the romance, but for the psychological autopsy of a relationship. For your final takeaway today, I want you to consider a personal action step that has nothing to do with books. Perform a boundary audit in your own life. This doesn't just apply to romantic partners. It applies to friends, family, and your workplace. Identify one line that has been moved recently. Ask yourself if you are forgiving a behavior because it was a genuine mistake, or if you are forgiving it because you are afraid of the conflict that comes with standing your ground. You don't need to be in a crisis to learn the lesson of where you end and where someone else's demands begin. Deciding where your us ends and where your self begins is the most important boundary you will ever draw. If you found this analysis helpful, consider how these themes show up in the media you consume and the relationships you observe. There's a lot of power in being able to spot the halo effect before it blinds you. Thank you for spending this time diving deep into the mechanics of empathy and survival. I will see you in the next chapter.